Y'all, I'm determined to finish this. And so that card just got full. So now I have 2 full cards. And I'm still going to finish this. Okay, so we're in chapter 30. We're almost to the end of this study for this session. And what we've basically seen is Jacob, which I think his name also means the trickster. Remember how he tricked his brother out of his birthright and his blessing, and now he's been tricked by Laban. Isn't that ironic? Into not getting Rachel until he gets Leah, and that between those two, he's had all these children that end up becoming the tribes of Israel through Abraham, Isaac, and who? Jacob. So now Jacob is setting himself up to get wealth in a very dishonest way. And after, in verse 33, he says, my honesty will testify for me in the future. Boy, does it, but not in a good way, in the opposite way, in a bad way. He's manipulating the animals to the point that he is blessed by them and Laban is not. And yet his blessing is really coming through God, not through his own scheming, because God has a plan and Jacob is a part of that plan. And so in chapter 31, we see that Jacob is hearing from Laban's sons. Jacob has taken everything from our father, everything he owned, and he's gaining wealth through what belonged to our father. But you also got to remember his father got his wealth because of the way that Jacob managed it all. But this is what's being said. You know, we're seeing the truth here, even though we're thinking, wait, that's not right. It's like, no, it's not, but that's what happened. And Jacob did do that. He did trick his dad, but his dad tricked him first. I mean, his uncle, sorry, Laban. This is Laban's son saying this. So they probably didn't really notice that their dad had tricked his nephew first. So it's just, it could be on reality TV, this story. All right, then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. After all this little cruddy stuff he's done, of course, he also got a bad rap himself, but then he started out doing a bad rap to Esau. But then Esau was the one who rebelled and caused Abraham and Isaac and Rebekah to be upset because he messed up the bloodline. So, but God said, no, there's still going to be a bloodline, and it's going to come through Jacob. So no matter what Jacob does, God's going to make this work because God's will be done. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out of the fields, and he says, I've noticed your father, his attitude has changed towards me, and you know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, that yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. So in all fairness to Jacob, he's been tricked 10 times by his uncle and their dad. And he says, however, God has not allowed him to harm me. And the speckled ones will be your wages. The streaked ones will be your wages. And then all the flocks that were born were streaked. So God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. And you would have thought it was through the manipulation done by Jacob, but it was really God's plan all along. So it doesn't look right, but it is right. So the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob, here I am. And he said, look up and see all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked and speckled or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you, and I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Remember that? Now leave this land once and go back to your native land. So God really did do it that way. And note, it says the angel of God said, and then it says in that's in verse 11, then in verse 13 it says, I am the God of Bethel. Again, do not get confused that God is an angel. That simply means that the angel is speaking on behalf of God. Okay? Then Rachel, in verse 14, then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Now he's sold us. But he has used up what they paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. You got to remember that there was a bride price, just I guess we would call it now like a dowry, which was partly what you got when you got a bride, and what they're basically saying is, all this wealth was ruined by Laban and the way he did things. So they're wondering, are we even still, what will this mean for our inheritors? And Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all the livestock ahead of him, and along with all the goods that he had accumulated, to Paddan Aram, and to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. What? That doesn't mean she believed in the gods. But it does mean that Laban did. So this is not a man of God who loved God. He believed in other little gods, that they would keep their little gods, little statues around. This is their gods. We still see that today. There are people who have little statues of gods that they serve, and they believe that's their little gods. And it's like, that's your God? A God that's a little statue? And this is why God said, don't do that. But also, it's sad to me when somebody believes that that's an actual God. And people say, well, you got to let people believe what they believe. It's like, no, as a Christian, I'm called to tell them about the real God. You just got to do it in a loving way, but a truthful way. Okay, so let's keep going. So she stole the little gods. So they crossed the Euphrates River, headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. God said this to him. This is to Laban, who didn't even believe in God, apparently, if he had all these little baby God statues. Jacob, and I say baby gods, just little God statues. I mean, it says that she was able to steal them out of her household, and we'll see that they're small enough later to fit in the camel's saddle pack. So they are little, okay? So Jacob pitched his tent, and Laban, catches up to him, and he says, what have you done? You've deceived me. You carried off my daughters like captives in a war. Why did you run off with them secretly and deceive me? If you just told me, I could have sent you away with joy and singing and to the music of timbrels and harps. You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You've done a foolish thing, and I have the power to harm you. But last night, God of your the God of your father. Okay, so he didn't say he believed in him, but he's like, your God, the God of your father. He said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now, what that might mean is when people had great power, you've heard life and death is in the tongue. That's because the kings used to be able to say he lives or he dies. He lives or he dies by the power of what he said. That there really was life and death in the words of the king. And this may be similar to that he says, I actually have the power to harm you. But God told me not to do that, not to say anything. So it's like, what? The power of his words? Yeah, apparently he could give a command and could have done that. He says, now, you've gone off because you longed to return to your father's household, but what I don't get is, why'd you steal my gods? Can't make this up. And Jacob answered, saying, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. So obviously Laban did have a good bit of power still left in his ability to come take the things that Jacob had taken that was rightfully his, but he still shouldn't have done it the way he did it. And he says, but if you find anyone, this is Jacob saying to Laban, if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In verse 32, at the end of it, it says, now Jacob did not know that it was Rachel who had stolen the gods, because he just said they're going to die, whoever that is. And keep in mind, he adores her, he loves her. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and went through Leah's tent, and he goes through everything. Now, Rachel, very smart, very conniving. Who's this remind me of? Reminds you of a couple other women who did some conniving, dishonest things, clever things, smart things. Remember Rebecca? Remember Sarah? Remember Eve? Here, now we have Rachel. Now Rachel has taken the household gods and put them inside her camel sack and was sitting on them. And when her father came out as he's going through stuff trying to find them, she says, oh, Father, don't be angry. I can't stand up in your presence because I'm on my period. This is in the Word of God. So he searched, but he couldn't find the household gods. Why? Because she was sitting on them, and she said, oh, I'm having my period, so nobody wanted to see her stand up. So it's like, okay, fine, just sit there. We're looking for these little gods. Never occurred to them that she was sitting on them. And, Jacob was angry, and he looked at Laban, and he took Laban to task, and he says, What is my crime? How have I wronged you that you would hunt me down now that you have searched through all my goods, and you have found that, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it in front of me here, in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, for I have, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring animals torn with wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. I demanded payment for what was, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the day and night, the cold at night, and the sheep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years while I was in your household, and I worked for you 14 for your 2 daughters and 6 for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me,